Alrighty, welcome back to KC Grid Talk, episode number 55. As always, my name is Caleb Vieska, and this week, no Alex, but Emory is here with me here tonight. Honestly, we had a great time out at the Stars Championship Series for the King of the Castle. Emory, you were racing. First of all, how'd your weekend go? I know you finished in the top 20, which was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up 16th in the final. I think reasonably was about where we should have been on pace. I think we had moments where we were top 15. The final started out pretty good. We had a mechanical issue midway through the race, which kind of dropped us back from the edge of the top 10 into the mid teens. But all in all, I think for the lack of seat time I've had over the last year, it was a pretty successful weekend. We only had one wreck over the course of the weekend, stayed in the top half of the field, made the final, had a few good passes, a good few battles, and you know, looking forward to the next one, and hopefully we can find ourselves a little bit further up going forward.
Hey, there you go. From our side, I think everything was pretty good. I think that was, we all kind of talked about it when the weekend was over, but it was one of the smoothest streams I think we've had in quite some time. And I think everybody killed it, right? From the crew side of things, a lot of new guys and girls, and they all killed it. So it was huge for our entire crew to kind of work as hard as they did. Teardown was super cool, as many people saw. I think this weekend. Um, that we had the tent that you guys saw at Charlotte again. So kind of like a full on team thing now, where we like are tearing down the tent at the end of the day, which is pretty cool. But yeah, we actually tore down in record time and actually played football. I don't know if you saw that, Emery, but we had like a little 5-on-5 scrimmage.
I heard.
MVP jersey up in the rafters. Grace Overbeck, James's younger sister, she actually like killed it. Player of the game by far. She got the game ball, and not to mention, I cracked my phone. I don't know if you guys can see that. So yeah, it was worth it. But that being said, let's I guess recap a little bit of what we saw from the winners here this weekend. Oliver Hodgson went back to back in KA. In mini, Jaden Francisco was able to win. Micro Brody Stoffel, OKNJ, we saw John Antonino. KA Junior, we saw Isaac Malkett. Am I missing something? Pro
Master Shifter with
Masters
Musser.
Shifter with Jordan Musser. K Masters with Clay Settles.
Yep.
Um, dude, we see so much. OKN and obviously James and Adrian Renardin. So those are your winners, Kings of the Castle, which I think there was great racing all around. I loved, I think, the cadet categories the most. Mini, I think, had one of the coolest heat races. Heat two, I think. Heat two, or it was either a pre-final. But anyways, great racing all around the entire weekend. I really enjoyed watching it. Emery, I don't know how much you saw, but to me, the racing was pretty dope all around. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean Newcastle's always going to put up a really good show. I think the Stars layout year after year puts on some of the best racing we see throughout the U.S. and throughout the world. This weekend I thought was really cool in the sense that each class kind of had their own unique storyline. Like
Yeah.
I look at Mini Swift had a really good battle all the way up until the final, and then Jaden Francisco. I think if you're choosing one drive of the weekend, probably the most flawless drive to be able to pull out that gap and the consistency he had lap after lap after lap. Hodgson in the K final as well. I mean,
Yep.
all weekend, honestly, it looked like he was on the back foot. And I remember we were talking about this before the race with a couple of the guys that were up towards the front of the grid that conventional wisdom would say had quicker pieces, and they were kind of like, yeah, like Hodgson hasn't really looked all that fast this weekend for Oliver Hodgson standards. And then you show out in the final, and I mean, he got a little bit fortunate with the way that the field battled, but able to pull out a big gap in the end to go back to back. And then you have the classes that were all up brawls, Micro Swift all weekend. To me, really good battles, really clean battles all throughout, ending up with Brody Stoffel getting an amazing first win for him on our coverage, as well as that with Slate Harrell, who's looked like a star so far this year. We saw Lennox battle through the field, and a lot of good stories to go with that. And then throughout the entire weekends, the quality of racing I felt like was really high. There was almost no massive incidents, no red flags on Sunday. We saw
There was one I think at Masters all weekend. That
on
was that the
Sat.
only one
It was on
on Saturday.
Saturday.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
that
was
was the
Saturday
only one all
afternoon.
weekend. Yeah.
But like no real red flags. And then the craziest stat, and I mentioned this in our car chaser group chat. the KA final had 0 DNFs, not a single non-classified finisher, which is the first time in 6 years that that's happened in any of the major series. So, I mean, the quality of the fields, the penalties were not really a massive storyline this weekend for the most part. There were a couple, such as John Antonino and the KA junior side of things, and obviously the OKNJ one that got overturned that were storylines. But for the most part, I felt like the standard of racing was really high. And as much as at times we've harped on kind of racecraft quality and lack thereof on this show, like to me, that was the biggest takeaway for me is class after class after class. There wasn't much that you could really complain about. There were incidents here and there, a couple of guys getting upset over calls or lack thereof, but as a whole, I think this was one of the highest quality races we've seen all year.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think Shifter was one of the most impressive ones that we saw all
Oh
weekend.
yeah,
You talk about the battle for the win. That was huge. I was actually so I was getting ready for the post race interviews for second and third place, I believe, or I think I only did
yeah.
second place because we were trying to keep everything on schedule. But even then, like the command was super awesome. I see Christians watching on from home, and the entire Stars crew. I mean, they killed it. The hospitality for us was honestly amazing. Donuts on Sunday, you saw him on the stream with that, so that was huge, as well as a little surprise they left for us, which I'm sure he's gonna understand. But nah, yeah, it was great. Shifter was honestly, I think, one of the coolest shows that we've been trying to get right for quite some time, and we got it right this weekend. So that was huge for us to see that everything went according to plan. I think the whole pro show was super cool for us. That being said, we've talked a lot about this year, right, Emery, of drivers that have, especially in the shifter category, that have impressed us over at SCUSA, over at Stars. And the question of, we're halfway through the year. We're in month 6. And this is where, I guess, quote unquote, referrals start coming out for teams, for drivers, for us. Shifter being the biggest class in the US, the most competitive in the US, like we've seen all year long. We've talked about who up to this point has been the driver of the year in the shifter class. I'm going to let you go first, but I think I have my idea. I'm not sure if we're going to agree on this, but I'll let you, I guess, get the floor first on your shifter driver of the year up to halfway, at the halfway point, pretty much.
So this year so far in shifter, I mean, it's been Billy Musgrave had a comment on one of our posts yesterday with a certain drama that happened over the course of the weekend, talking about how it was the most stacked pro shifter field in the history of American karting. And it's hard to argue with that over the basis of the year. You have Danny Formal looking really strong in his kind of one appearance in the Winter Series and then winning, really sweeping the weekend with PSL on week 1 of the season. Then we had AJ versus Mateus with Justin White getting a win in Orlando, the second round of the Winter Series. You had Billy Musgrave and Gavin Bailiff duking out in Houston. You had Mateus Morgado and AJ Myers. They're always going to be up there. The GFC boys always going to be threats as well. But there's one guy throughout all of this, or all the races that he's run, which has been both of the Pro Tour races, both of the Stars races to this point, that at no point in any of the 4 weekends that he's run has he looked like he's outside of the top 5. And that guy is Jay Irwin. And I know you're going to look and say, oh, Jay hasn't won a race yet. He hasn't been able to put it all together. But on aggregate, if you look at everyone else, they've all had a down weekend, right? For AJ, and this is something that we're going to come back to at some point over the course of the next month because there is another discussion to be had on that. For AJ, it's kind of been a down year to this point for him. For Mateus, you look at his pace, at really both of the SCUSA races, but particularly in Cincinnati, where he struggled to kind of get himself on top form and have the Mateus Morgado show that we've seen in years past. But for Jay Irwin, Houston, he was finished right on Morgado's bumper for the podium. You look at his pace in Charlotte, had it not been for the engine grenading itself in Heat 1, likely would have had a really strong chance at winning and beating Mateus head to head, having done that at pretty much every single session other than the heat race that season. And then Cincinnati was right in there with the fight for the win, and then as well as that in Newcastle. So for Jay Irwin, he leads the championship at SCUSA heading into the final round of the season. He's within striking distance of Mateus on the star side of things. I mean, we talked last year, the highs for Jay Irwin were tremendous, almost a 10-second win in Charlotte and then getting on the box at Pro Tour in Orlando. But this year, the consistency has been phenomenal. And that's why for me, as with Alex, saying that he's been the most consistently quick driver so far this year, I think it's got to be Jay Irwin for driver of the year so far in shifter.
That's that's a good one. Honestly, that's I think a great pick for driver of the year. The only I guess counter I could have to that, you know, compared on growth, I would say, and you know, it's kind of along the same lines. Is for me Gavin Bailiff, right, with a breakout victory at the start of the year. Again, bad luck for him at MCC, but besides that, he's been consistently, I think, quicker than we've ever seen him in years past. And to me, I think that win weighs a lot in this, I guess, topic of conversation, right? So yeah, to me, it's Gavin, and due to the fact that we saw how competitive he was in that second moto, driving through the field as well on Sunday this past weekend. But yeah, to me that win has a lot of weight, and as well, it's just overall like improvement, right, of last year to what we saw to you know now this year, moving over with the Burrow guys. But you know, by far, you know, two of the same names for us, and I think the Burrell Art team has been the team of the year, you know, across the board on the shifter package. So a huge. I guess shout out to them for what they've done so far to this point this year. And yeah, that being said, I don't think this is a topic to debate all too much, Emery. I think our next one is probably a little better.
Yeah, the one that we put out the poll for, I'm assuming, is what
Yep.
Caleb is getting at here. So for some background on this, this is year number 3 of the OKM package in Stars, and with Stars having over 300 entries this past weekend for Newcastle, the strongest showing that we've seen from them of any event in Stars history. So first off, round of applause for Stars for,
Hey,
I mean, over 300 entries in a national race is nothing to scoff at. I mean, and beyond that, like I mentioned, the quality of driver, the quality of event is phenomenal. But having said that, it's year 3 of the OKM package, and
wait,
you
wait,
know,
wait, wait, wait. Pull up the
we,
results first. Pull up the results before we get into it. Pull up the
so
results.
so has the introduction of OKN been successful for Stars? Is a question that the inspiration behind this question was I had this discussion with a couple of people at the track this past weekend, and when I first heard it, I was like, that's a crazy question to ask. I mean, you look at what Stars has done with the Pro Show, you look at the numbers that they've drawn over the course of the last couple of weekends, and you look at the quality of drivers in OKN, and you're like, well, it has to be successful, right? But I heard this opinion just enough to where I want to debate this. And as you can see, our grid pulse, we asked you guys on Instagram over the course of the last few hours to talk about what you guys think on the class, whether or not OKN has been a success. And the results were a resounding yes. 88% of the people said OKN has been successful. 12% said no. Now, there were a few interesting people that said no that were worth mentioning. I'm not going to say who they were, but I will say that a certain shifter driver that has been brought up that has been on the show before does not think that OKN has been successful. Caleb, do you think OKN has been successful?
Yes, I do. So you know, kind of looking back on the weekend, I missed out on Charlotte um, this past week, but to me, you know, the growth of the package over the last 2 years, with the introduction of OK and J last year to this year, right? You see the numbers grow double, and to me, it was some of the best racing that we saw all weekend long was in OK and J, right? The you know, I think there's different winners across most of the sessions. The class was, in my opinion, looked super even, and an OKN as well, right? I don't think we've had, you know, outside of Paulie and maybe Brandon Carr, the only two kind of repeat winners where we're seeing somebody else kind of win on a given weekend on the class. And to me, like that's been super interesting to watch, right? OK and Jaya has been, you know, double up on numbers, and for OKN the same thing. Like we're starting to see a lot more drivers kind of get up there, fight up at the front, and that's, you know, with the PSL team committed to the package last year, which I think has been huge for the class, and as well the competition that we've seen across the board. But to me, the success of it more than anything has been the growth in numbers, especially in OK and J, because that I think junior and even your masters shows you if your series is healthy. And I think stars show that, right, with 30 masters from across the U.S. coming over and racing, and the junior classes as well, right? Because those are your customer paying classes, and a lot of those drivers want to be a part of the OKNJ program, of the OKN movement, and I think the competitiveness in the class has been super cool to see, and see growth and development as well with drivers, and I think all around, that's why I think it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, I think first off, OKNJ this year has been a massive success. I will say, like seeing that class consistently draw 20 plus, and more so, you know, I'll be completely honest. Last year, I felt like the quality of racing in OKNJ was not up to par. Whether it be drivers getting their first experience in the engine, teams kind of not used to setting up for it, and maybe the coaching wasn't quite where it needed to be for drivers so young hopping into packages with as much speed as it is. Last year, the quality was not quite there. This year, though, I will say OK and J has taken a massive step forward. And to me, on Sunday, I would argue was probably, in terms of pure racing, the best race of the day.
By far.
Yeah, I think OK and J at Newcastle was phenomenal. Having said that, I do have a few concerns on OKN at this point. Year number 3 of the program. And again, it's one of those things where when I ask the question about has OKN been successful, it's not so much saying that I'm not a believer in the package. I'm not a believer in what Stars has done because the pro show with OKN has brought guys like Diego Ramos, brought Paulie. It's gotten guys like Brandon Carr, Alex Stanfield back in the fray of things. There's been some headliners. There's been some great racing. There's been some great races, but you have to look at what the field is over the course of the season over the last 3 years. And you can frame it as a pro class isn't going to get that many entries. It's not going to be that like stacked. But when you look down the list and you realize that there were only 20 entries in Newcastle, there's been only, they've cracked the 20 number only I believe, 4 times over the course of the last 3 years. And it's not necessarily like a stacked field either. So you look down the list and you have a really strong top 5, a really strong top 8. And outside of that, the growth of the class has not been what I think people might have expected at the start of 2023. You still have a midfield that, let's face it, like isn't even as strong as the KA midfield. You look through KA and you have guys like Hodgson, you have guys like Peyton Phillips, you have guys that in theory you would think would be running OKN that aren't. And it gets to the point where you look down the list and the field just simply is not there. And, it's year 3. It's not that I don't think OKN is a good class. I certainly think the engine's phenomenal. It's a lot of fun to drive and it's put on some good racing. But, you know, we've had a 10 race sample now. The entries aren't quite where you would want it to be. And as well as that, I would say of the 3 of the pro classes and the KA classes, I would say it's been the weak link in terms of the show that is put on at Stars. So to me, OKN has been a good experiment. We've seen some good with it, but I have a lot of concerns about the field quality and the amount of numbers that's drawing in after 10 races that we've seen with the package so far.
Yeah, to me, kind of being year 3, right? Like looking at the other side, to me, you really have to look at both sides of what we're seeing in U.S. karting today with X30, right? Like give it on the other side. Um, and you know, I really like the fact with the different winners that we're seeing, and you talk about, why doesn't Stars just go to the X30 side of things, or whatever. To me, on one side, maybe you have a package that for a long time a lot of people were kind of getting tired of, and the biggest thing whenever you talk about X30, you talk about you know the Rawson Performance Group, AVP, and all that stuff on one side, and then on the other, you want to see a little bit of variety with winners and whatnot. And I think the only thing that we're missing from the front of the field in X30 are your Rawson Performance Group drivers and Austin Garrison. That's all we're missing on the OKN side of things. So to kind of find the right words to say this is I think a lot of people are me personally is watching this weekend. It's almost like a refreshing side of things where you're seeing people challenged by a new engine package. I like that a lot, right? I like the fact that we saw you know very close racing all throughout the weekend where over 3 years, year three, I'm excited for what year four is going to look like a year from now, right? Whenever you have more juniors moving up, I'm excited for the future of the class. For X30, I can't say I feel the same way for the future of X30 because we've seen that class for I don't know how many years now. It's been Emory since we've seen the introduction of the X30 package.
It's been about 9, like we've seen it since 2016 on the US side of things, at least nationally.
And what year was the exact peak? Would you say of the X30 package where we were seeing on any given weekend you couldn't name who was going to go out there and win?
I mean, honestly, like year 1, year 2, like
Do you know like the well? I guess that isn't too. Do you know like the exact entry counts that they were getting on those first couple years?
they were high. Like 2018 Newcastle started 75 X30s at Summer Nationals, and 2017 had pretty much full Pro Tour grids throughout the entire year. Like the popularity of X30 basically did not miss a beat from Leopard to X30 from 2015 to 2016 to 2017. And it's a little bit of a more complicated introduction because USPKS took an extra year compared to SCUSA to bring in the X30, if I remember correctly, and there were still some hangouts from Rotax, but X30 was on the money pretty much right away when it came to numbers.
And that was like right after the exact like shift from what was the Leopard package, right? Previous to just full on swing to the X30 side of things.
Yeah, it pretty much worked out that way. I mean, IME brought in the X30 in the mid 2010s. There was a year or two of transition, like I said, like Leopard ran, I believe 2015. USPKS was the last season they had the Leopard package. 2014 or 2015 as well was the same thing for Pro Tour. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty much a seamless transition.
To me, it's like right, like like that was I think a more like I would say like full swing of what was the Leopard over to the X30 side of things, and I think OKN was brought in a time where we're kind of year well, it was brought in 3 years ago, so what 6 years into the X30 package, it's going to be hard to compete whenever two series are running that package over one just running the OKN. So people are picking and choosing, but to me, it's I don't think it goes unnoticed that you had the likes of Blake Nash coming in this weekend, and even more drivers throughout the years, right, doing one offs here and there on the OKN side of things. Speed now with they had about two or three junior drivers this past weekend. I believe it was two or three junior drivers this past weekend with their tent starting to fill up with people wanting to come over and try the package. To me, it's like give it time, give it time to grow. But from the start of the first year to what we saw to seeing a variety as well in winners, to me is the biggest thing and what's made the class so appealing to people maybe even watching from home. Given the race this past weekend, the main event I would say wasn't the most interesting, but I like seeing or starting a race and not knowing who's going to go out there and win. And to me, that's the biggest thing about the package being new, being a challenge for engine builders, being a challenge for teams and drivers as well on setup and how to drive it all around.
I guess my thought on that is, we've had time. We've seen just because different drivers enter the event does not mean that it's necessarily like induced
But but
parity.
but I would say like right, we're like year three. Like it hasn't really been that much time. Like,
I mean, by year 3 of the X30 package, there was obviously a
but
lot of
that was
people.
but to me that
Year
was completely different.
year 3 of the KA in 2020 for Pro Tour, you were at least getting almost 40. You had almost 50. You were averaging 45 to 50 entries a weekend for KA at USPKS, 45 or 40 to 45 at SCUSA, and that was in the middle of a pandemic, right? Like engine packages, when introduced in the US, should not have this long of an onboarding. And in talking to people around the paddock, I think a holdup with the OKN is there's just simply nowhere else that runs it, right? Like We saw it a little bit of Challenge of the Americas in 2023, but aside from that, like there's no club series that runs the OK, and you can't show up to Trackhouse and just run a Trackhouse club race for the OK, and you can't show up to Newcastle and run a KRA race. You can't show up to USPKS with a OK and run anywhere, you know? So there's only one series at the moment that's adopted it. And beyond that too, like if you're looking at it from a customer side and you're say a upper tier KA driver that maybe isn't quite going to run up front with the Pollys of the world, the Blakes of the world, the Overbecks of the world, why spend the money to get an engine package to pay thousands and thousands of dollars a weekend for a package that you only have one series you can run it on, right? And conversely, if you're watching this, if you're like another series looking into it, why make the step? Why make the leap into an absolute beast of an engine that maybe there's 30 or 40 drivers in the US that are adequately capable of driving that to its maximum potential? Like, I think the problem that you run into is OKN at the moment does not have the customer base and the series base to be able to hold itself outside of stars. And if you're just going to get an OKN to run stars, unless you have reason to want to go over to Europe and run a direct drive package, or you simply are a Poly of the world or a Blake Nash of the world that has the wherewithal to try it and know that you're going to be quick on it, there's limited value in it. And I think looking at it inwards from like Star's perspective, you have OK and you have OK and J. I'm not sure at this point that it's really like providing that. Oh, Caleb's gonna call in my ear.
My alarm's going off. Proceed.
But I'm just not sure where like the added value is from. You have a shifter class that is phenomenal. You brought in Adrian Rendon this year. You have Mateus Morgado in. You have pretty much every single big name in shifter outside of the GFC guys showing up each week to run pro shifter, right? And with pro shifter, they're getting a consistent 25 to 30 each weekend. With OKN, when you don't have the field depth, you don't have the midfield, and you're also missing the Garrisons and the Norbergs of the world, it's a little bit more of a tough sell. And like I mentioned, I just think that it hasn't quite delivered what I feel like Stars maybe would have been hoping for. And certainly it's not brought the customer base from the rest of the US to kind of catch on to the engine package, if that makes sense.
I would say it's delivered for me. I think it's delivered for the people in the class. Finding an affordable, I'm honestly not
I don't
familiar with the prices, so I'm not going to say
I
it's
do,
affordable. I'm not going to say it's affordable, but to me, like I would say the satisfaction overall for people who are running the class is 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 pretty good, in my opinion. Right, walking around talking to people in the paddock, and a lot of people seem happy with like I was talking about earlier, right? With like the variety, the racing, and people coming out here to race, right? And to me, that's been the biggest thing. Talked to Royce and his dad for quite some time. They obviously have plans to go over to Europe later on in the year, so I see, the added kind of want to raise the package for them. So that was huge to hear from them and to listen a little bit to why they're trying it. But I think overall, right, looking outside of um of kind of what you said to me, like the real success out of Stars is seeing, you know the growth of it, I would say, more than anything in the OKNJ class. To me, outside of kind of what you said, right? Because the points you make are I would say very strong and very valid. But again, they're the only series that have adopted it, and I don't think anybody else outside of it is with IAME and the X30 product with how long it's been in, because that's a safe route, right? For everybody else, that's a safe route of not adopting anything else. But I think the fact of wanting to be different and even having the class survive to me has been a success with 20 this weekend, with the growth they've done, with the sponsorship opportunities they've given. To me, you're not going to see your Raleighs of the world, your Austin Garrisons of the world come in and race, unless there's some kind of incentive for them outside of it. And I see the idea behind of what Stars is doing with the scholarship programs into car stuff and a Mazda and a Lucas Oil. So I would say, that has been a successful point for them. And you're not going to see those guys come in until, there's a change in that. But the motto at Stars is to provide opportunities to the next step. And I think seeing the growth of more than anything, OK and J, like I said before, has been the biggest part that's been satisfactory for me. And knowing that the class is still that the class has been successful all in all.
Yeah, and I mean, OK and J has been a revelation this year, and I have to give credit to Stars on that because that's something that they've put a lot of work into and promoting the class, and again, being pioneers. Like you have to think of it like process based. I love what Stars did with OKN. I think it was a great idea. Ziggler other Series Ag, you're not going to get enough of a market imprint by just copying what SCUSA does, copying what USPKS does, and expect to have the same level of success. So Stars tried differently with OKN. I think it was a great idea in 2023 to bring on the class. They were on board with the pro show from the get go. They've been really good in terms of branding out their partnerships with Lucas Oil, with Mazda over the course of the last couple of years. Like to me, Stars has run it the right way, and that has to be mentioned because it is a separate discussion in itself from the class being successful. But again, you mentioned that Garrison, the Raleigh boys aren't going to show up unless there's incentive to do so. And again, for me, that's one part of the concern, right? Like the RPGs of the world, the Austin Garrisons of the world, if they show up, sure, whatever. But if you don't have the hook to bring customer drivers in to a pro class, because ultimately, like Paulie, Ramos, Blake, even in Austin Olds, you could say, yeah, like pro tier drivers, pro level drivers, but the midfield just really doesn't exist to the degree it does. I feel like this year's made a little bit of a step forward, but for all that being talked about, like OKN through 3 years, you had 2023, the champion Brandon Carr basically did not return for 2024. He ran,
Well, he didn't
he,
return to karting all around, so
yeah, he did. He ran almost a full X30 calendar last year. He only did one race in OKN.
okay. He
Yeah,
did do it, but again, all right, proceed.
yeah. So Brandon Carr ran the first year, won the first year, didn't show up for year 2 or year 3, really, right? You have other guys that have kind of dabbled in the show. Once guys get into OKN, like they don't leave. Like Carr's kind of a one-off example, but when you have only 15 or 20 guys in a field, you would think that it would be more enticing for the guys in the midfield of a KA or the guy or like the upper front runners, right? Like the Jared Corks, the Hudson Browns, the Sam Avrutskis, the guys that got on the podium around Charlotte to look at that and be like, hey, like there's a chance to be in the pro show. There's a chance to like get all this media coverage, right? And it's not that OKN's that much more expensive than KA or an X30 because it isn't really more expensive than X30. It's marginally more expensive than a KA to maintain and to buy and to like get all the separate parts for it. But with OKN, you're limited to at this point 4 races a year. With KA, with X30, with Shifter, you have many more opportunities. And unfortunately for Stars, this is not something that they can really control unless they start tapping into the regional and sort of grassroots market. But at the moment, that's
Which they
control.
are next year.
Yeah, but not with the OKN at the moment,
Okay,
unless I've misread on that. I think it's just a 206 and K based package.
I'd have to read
Um,
it on it. Yeah.
yeah, but at the moment, like until they have that kind of scalability of the OKN package outside of Stars, there's limited. There's going to be limited customer drivers, and to me, it's hard to say how much the OKN is like adding to the show. I think Shifter, you talk up and down the paddock. The Shifter racing was phenomenal this week, and the Shifter racing was phenomenal in Charlotte, right? OKNJ even as a derivative of OKN, has been successful in the sense that it's providing a challenge for junior drivers that isn't there anywhere else in the sport, or at least in the US side of the sport. But OKN is kind of just the middle stepchild at the moment that hasn't really like you think about it. And OKN this year,
I
the
see. I see what you're saying. Proceed. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it kind of gets lost in the fray. It gets lost in the shuffle. And I think that until that changes, until we have like a classic OKN season, I can't see really it being like a success. A great try. I think that it's been great in terms of stars. Like stars over the course of the last couple of years have built a lot of um, a lot of market share in the sport, and the reputation of it has gone up tremendously since 2022 when we first kind of started broadcasting the stars races in 2021, which to me was the first like full-fledged stars season. So they've had success as a brand. I think OKN's a part of that, but I wouldn't say the class itself has been successful in developing.
Well, agree to disagree. Next topic, and I'm gonna bring this up here. Is there any concern about having too many engine packages in the U.S.? Emery, I'll let you kind of start off with this one on kind of. Is there any concern, do you think, for having too many engine packages for a guy like yourself who is still kind of actively racing?
I mean, for me at this point, it really doesn't matter. I've kind of made up my mind. I'm a KA lifer, unfortunately. Um, but as a whole, like, you know, OKN has the issue of you only have one series that's running it. And for the class itself, that's not ideal to build. But holistically, we have one premier 100cc class in KA. We have one premier 125cc class in X30. We have one premier gearbox class in KZ. It's hard to find many other periods in US karting over the last 20 years where that's really been the case. In the mid 2010s, it was the war between Rotax and Leopard and even a little bit of IAME stuff, right? The 100cc stuff with Yamaha, objectively, we all love Yamaha, or at least I did, but Yamaha was nowhere close to the quality of an engine of a KA that could be scaled onto a national level, right? You had other engines by Pirelli that kind of didn't ultimately live in the parts. My point being that no matter what year it's been up until about 5 or 6 years ago, there was kind of a mess in differentiating those three categories. Now we have one clear 100cc class, one clear water cooled 125cc class, one clear shifter class. And yes, there is also rock. There is also OKM, which is a direct drive separate. But in the nicest way possible, like rock has kind of gotten watered out of the market a little bit. And OKN, as to my point a little while ago, still has not grown in terms of the amount of people that even have an OKN engine for it to really be cannibalizing the other numbers. So at this point, I would say no. And I haven't even mentioned Caleb, the biggest class in the U.S., which is 206 racing.
Why'd you mention me?
I mean, no reason at
Oh,
all.
you got yeah.
But 206, like it has a massive market capital, and it's
Mhm,
also, I mean, you could say the Tillotson package, but for the most part, 206 is more or less unrivaled in four-stroke racing. So
mhm.
each sector has its own market dominators, and for me, until there's a true war, until rock maybe rises back up, or maybe someone comes out with a legit competitor to the 206. Until that point, I'm not too concerned about too many engines right now because each series has their own identity with their own classes, and each engine package has one distinct leader that is kind of usable for everyone. And I think for right now, that's a really healthy place to be for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'd agree with Emery, right? We're kind of in this spot where you see, you have a clear cut engine package for your micro mini cadet drivers, depending on what you want to go into, and with the 206 especially. I'm not going to sit here and argue that OKN is bigger than the X30, because fact of the matter is it's not. So if you want to go into 125cc racing, and want to race in more places, then you can go ahead and buy an X30. If you want to try something different, want to try something new, something fresh, in my opinion, I think the OKN is, where you want to be if you do want to race 125cc and be a part of something cool, over with stars, which is kind of what I've thought of, in my opinion, Emery, the success of the package, right? Trying something different, trying something cool, and trying something that's been working for some people. So, and that is growing. So that's been and I wouldn't say there's too much of a concern of too many engine classes. I would say if we're in having this conversation 5 years from now, OKN is massive. And we have the road tax is back to full force, and rock, and yeah, I would say maybe there is a lot, but even then, right? I think I don't know if I would be too upset about having more places to race, honestly. I don't know what you think, Emery, but I like the fact that you kind of get to pick and choose where you want to go. Each place has its own kind of place where you can race. Rock Up still has their race in Las Vegas if you want to go to race out there. Road Tax has their big world finals over in Europe. We have the X30 package with SCUSA and USPKS, and as well OKN, right, with the Star Championship Series and racing that over in Europe if that's something that interests you. So I don't think there's too much of a concern, and I like the variety of a package that you like. So I wouldn't say there's too many problems with the different engine package. I would say for the grassroots level, yeah, I think that would be more of a concern if you have like a lot of different grassroots level packages. But I think more than anything, you have the 206 that's a huge for grassroots, and as well as the 100cc K100 that's available almost everywhere at every local track that you go to, which is I think huge for the sport on what our grassroots classes as well. Micro Mini, 206 Cadet, and now a 206 Kid Kart with also the conversation of Miami. I honestly think that Miami has more, or Kid Kart has more variety in packages, right? With the Honda, with the 206, that's they're a national class for them to race, and now with the new Miami, which we've kind of seen. But even then, I think we're in a good spot. I think we're in a healthy spot, right? I think the three series are in a healthy spot, right? Talking about SCUSA Stars this past weekend with 300, huge for them on what was a record-breaking, event for them. And I think it says a lot about the Masters class. Whenever you see that class flourish with 30 drivers of, the most nitty-gritty guys in the sport that are there to race, that are there for, the those are going to be your most critical guys more often than not. And when you have 30 of them at your race, you're doing things right. So for the entire Stars guys, like huge shout out to them for making it a family, very, very cool. Very, very cool event, I would say. Really, really enjoyed it. Seeing that many people out there racing, having a good time, enjoying it. So that was super cool to see this weekend. And yeah, to me, Emery, that's it's been a great growth for them. I remember kind of looking at it, a lot differently, but this year, like it's been another level kind of stepped up for them. So huge, huge congrats. And funny enough, I was watching my first on air kind of moment that I had back in 2023. You were there that weekend. This grid walk that we did, and the whole feel of the event, it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. If anybody wants to go back and watch it, it's 2023 Stars. Um, Before the main event on Sunday, before Shifter, I did a grid walk. It was it was audio only. It was terrible. Said sounds good like 10 different times to 10 different drivers. That was terrible. So seeing, the amount of work that Stars has put in for to elevating their series, and that, we have equipment wise and growth wise, professionalism wise, is huge. I think that was the coolest thing to see after being back at the King of the Castle for my first event there in 2023. But that being said, this was a short one, Emery. Only 46 minutes. I know we actually have something else. Were you able to find the announcement on the Music City track that is opening up a new members track?
Yeah, if you give me like 10 seconds, because I may or may not have slacked on uploading that into the presentation, but if I can get
Hey,
this,
that being said, we actually need to
we
hit a
need to hear
commercial
from
real quick. We
we
need to
need
hear
to
from
hear
our
some.
sponsors. We need to hear from our sponsors. So that being said, we'll be right back, and with some news coming out of the karting, I guess you could say, universe this week. We'll be right back. Are you looking to take the next step in your racing journey? Well, look no further than PitFit.
With 2 locations in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Indianapolis, Indiana, PitFit trains drivers all the way from grassroots level karting to IndyCar and NASCAR, with top-of-the-line personalized coaching to improve physical and cognitive fitness.
For more information on programs, check out PitFit on Instagram or Facebook today.
Hey, what's up, Caleb?
What's up, Brandon?
You sound defeated. A long day at the office?
Yeah, got stuck at a cat food marketing meeting for like 3 hours. I don't know a thing about cat food, and I don't even work in marketing. And then I got sent on a coffee run like I was some sort of intern. Then at the end of the day, when I went to go get gas, I just realized everything is so darn expensive nowadays, man.
Yeah, you got that right.
Like, do you have any idea how much we're spending on Netflix?
That's like $20 a month.
Do you know how much we're spending on cable?
That's like $50 a month.
But you know what isn't expensive?
Tell me.
Kart Chaser Premium. For only $9.99 a month, you can watch all of the American karting action live from coast to coast. Subscribe and become a member today. Alrighty, welcome back. Emory, I just saw you found it, but this is actually huge. They're from the Music City over in Nashville, Music City Kartplex. They're adding a 0.9-mile track that officially works at designed exclusively for our most competitive karting enthusiasts. This is just a glimpse of what's coming in 2026, and it's building challenge the best. Follow us and stay tuned for updates, etc. This is huge. I would say with the addition of tracks all across, we've seen the West Coast start to grow a whole lot with the addition of K1 Circuit, the track down in Colorado, as well as Spring Mountain opening up. I believe K1, not K1. It's Pro Kart went there not too long ago, so that completely left my mind. But yeah, Pro Kart went there not too long ago, so that was huge for Spring Mountain and the growth of the entire West Coast. Very healthy out there. I know we're very healthy here down south as well. We had 180 out in Texas not too long ago, and as well, continuing to grow all throughout the East and as well in Nashville. So huge, huge news coming out of what's been, I would say, a great growth to the sport. Emory, last thing I want to talk about, which actually just came to my mind, is I was reading in on the rule books as I had been quite recently. And I want to talk a little bit about 2 weeks ago of what we saw over at the Texas Racing Series. Given we were there for I think quite some time post race, about 1:30. Many of you guys know, we were there with post race penalties, and there's been, I think something that we've been meaning to talk about for quite some time, but not even that. There's been an update to the SCUSA rulebook actually as of recently. Which what we used to have, the no call protest. So if you remember, I think, were you working? You were working over at SCUSA where we had, the no call used to work in the way where, if you wanted to take something to the stewards and have something added on after the race, you could, if you took your video up to, the officials at Supercarts USA and they reviewed it to what was thorough review to the race directors and etc. And after that, if there was a penalty applied to a driver, you could take it, after the race, and then they applied it to the driver. But if you were the victim in this case, nothing was said to you until the results were posted, and there was no way for you to protest this. And that, was, I think, what saw that weekend Enzo Di Gennaro get the win taken away from him in the mini race. This was, and then so this new rule, which was updated on April 17th, I believe, when submitting a protest. So this is the now update. When submitting a protest for an infraction not called by officials, the competitor must do so within 15 minutes after posting the official results. SCUSA will summon the competitor, who then has 15 minutes to present themselves to the penalty steward's office. Race officials will review any compelling video of the incident in addition to statements from both parties. Whether the protest results in a penalty or not, the decision shall be considered final. So from what I understood from the rules, from what I understood, as well as they're speaking on the phone with the race directors over at the Texas Racing Series, that was the first week where the rule was kind of applied. Um, you're supposed to kind of present both laptops against each other and pretty much debate on whether or not the no call is perceived for you or not. And so I guess with the first weekend of interpretation of that rule, we saw, I think, some hiccups in process where there was this huge line of protest to go protest a no call, which you don't have more than one protest. But even then, right, like it just kind of all got mixed in this blend of misinterpretation, I would say. And as there is with stuff that is new, there's going to be hiccups along the way. But I personally think that the addition of the protests for no calls has been huge, I would say, for the entire stewarding process. And I'm curious to hear your opinion as well, Emery, um, of having just a way to kind of defend yourself in a way, right? And making it, I would say, a little fair as well, more than anything, with the way that no calls work. So I'm excited to hear your side of things on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, it's great for the sport that we've kind of reached the level to where we're confident that we trust other parties to make counter protests, right? To protest a non-call, and have that opportunity to where naturally, like, you can have an eye in the sky looking at everything, and you're still not going to get every single call right. And so, having a mechanism to protest a non-call has been something that's been debated for years and years and years and years and years. And I think this is a step to the right direction. I think the De Janeiro incident in Texas was kind of highlighting a bit of a flaw in the reasoning of like it's tough to have a protest where you are cleared of any wrongdoing initially, where you weren't given a penalty on track, and then you find out you got penalized after the fact with no chance to defend yourself. I think there's a middle ground though between allowing those protests and allowing kind of like both sides to be heard out, which has to be the way that those protests going forward, because there's no racing series in the world that will have a post-race penalty process in which a penalty is slapped on without hearing from both sides, or at least no professional, no good series does that. However, I think the barrier to launch a counter protest needs to be substantially higher than the barrier to launch a protest that is simply arguing a call on the racetrack. Because to bring a non-call to the table, if you wanted to bring every single non-call and have both parties sit down and listen to it and go through that whole process, takes a long time, a lot of time and a lot of human effort. And there's a lot more that doesn't get called that you could potentially launch an argument for than the other way around. Because naturally, you average roughly 4 to 5 calls per race per class, and there's probably 20 or 30 different things over the course of a race that could debatably be argued as an infraction, just with the way that racing works, with how much of a contact sport karting has become. So just to keep everyone's head on safe, I think you need to maybe up the ante when it comes to protesting a non-call to make it, I guess, less enticing. And so now maybe it's getting rid of half of the line at a steward's office, but making it more challenging, or like more sort of leverage to do that than a normal protest is one way to go about it. The other way to go about it is simply increasing staff, which for TSRS, for a regional race, is a little bit insane. As I'm looking at this comment now from Graham Hinkle, plenty of avoidable contact incidents last weekend, and corner workers looking right at it all. Karting is seeing typical avoidable contact nonsense. Dirty driving, here we come. Again, I said at the start of the show, Stars to me was the best national weekend I've seen this year when it came to avoidable contact or lack thereof and incidents. Not saying it didn't happen. I think there were certainly various different things throughout the weekend where I maybe disagreed with the calls that were made, or I thought that there should have been a call that was present. But the racecraft standards aren't the issue most of the time. Most of the time, when you have high quality drivers, you're going to get pretty high quality racing. And when you have low quality drivers, when you have a series that allows too much, you start getting more low quality issues. I don't think that's the issue with TSRS. I think it's weekend one of implementing a complex system that you didn't have the staffing, I would say, to fully maximize that, and it's everyone's first time learning it. So I think it's a step forward. I think it's a great idea. I'd like to see a little bit more sort of responsibility, a little bit more leverage placed on launching a counter protest, but the idea is there in theory. And I think you're just gonna have to live with some of the hiccups.
Yeah. Needless to say, I think that was like a big one, in a sense,
Oh,
because
I have one more thing to say on that too.
proceed.
Scrubbing tires after the
That
commitment.
that's what I'm getting to. That's what I'm getting
Okay,
to.
I'll let
So
you set it up then.
so so my from my understanding, part of the no calls that we saw 2 weeks ago were for scrubbing tires past the commitment cone. So it was, to me, that's something that should be taken care of from the first heat race, right? If you want to set the tone throughout the weekend of what's right, what's wrong, the first heat race is your chance to do it, right? That's my personal opinion. But for the main event, like, to have that's just too late in the weekend to add a penalty like that, and then scrubbing tires. Yeah, I mean, that's just that's what I was kind of getting at, right? For 3 hours of you know kind of protests and counter protests and no calls, for the biggest one of them all being blocking on, what was the interpretation of blocking, and scrubbing tires, to me, was that, it's just a way to I don't know. I just wasn't a huge fan of the scrubbing tires kind of calls, when I felt like that should have been, handled from heat race number one, of like, hey, like, you're scrubbing tires, like, let's not, do that. And yeah, staffing may be a big thing. But again, right, it's a regional series that we saw 2 weeks ago. So I get it. Emory, I don't know if there's anything else you have, whether you're against the scrubbing tires penalty.
I mean, it's written into the rule book, like you can't just ignore a rule. The people that launched protests against that, fair play to them. Like, I can't say if I was in a tight championship battle and I saw my opponent scrub tires after the commitment line that I wouldn't protest that, because it is a written rule. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, I think it's not the most practical rule, and B, I think that's something that should be handled through a warning system, where the first time you do it, the first time you get caught is fine. The second time you do it, it's a penalty. Because one, that reduces the risk of people giving out protests after the race for a non-call for scrubbing tires,
Okay.
because it would just be the first infringement.
Before you get there, I do have to know. I don't have the track map with me now, but like, the line from where the commitment cone was to where we were starting the races was a huge time. Like, it was I think on the back straightaway, and we were starting not even on the front straight, but turn three, a little bit ways down. And granted, I understand that, whatever, to not whatever, but I understand that for safer starts, but that's a huge time where, gap, where we're seeing, the commitment cone, and over to where we're starting the race. So to me, that as well, right? Like, it just, yeah, if we're gonna have a commitment cone, I would say maybe put it a little closer to the starting line, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's a fair critique. But it's also where they place this commitment cone, like,
Agreed.
just
I'm just
like
saying, handle it heat one, right?
like
That's a heat one. Like, hey, you were scrubbing tires, like,
again,
from heat one.
give a warning and then a penalty. Solves everything. You hear a warning after heat one, you're on it. Okay, if I scrub the tires after this line, I'm gonna get a penalty. If you don't scrub your tires, if you don't get caught in the heat races, by all means in the final, scrub your tires. But that way, like, if people start getting warned about it from the get-go, they'll know not to do it.
You made this point, right? If you haven't been calling it all weekend, don't call it for the main event.
That's
You said that earlier, no? Or
I've
like
said
in a
I said that in the chat, yes, and I think that has it's another thing that has merit too. Like,
Yeah.
and this reminds me, and again, this is not me taking a dig at TSRS. Every series has their own individual gripes and whatnot that I could pull out. TSRS had a track limits thing a couple years ago at NTK, if you remember, where guys were getting 21 seconds worth of penalties for cutting the track in the
The
chicane.
chicane. Yes. 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 Yes.
If you're going to call something, it has to be called. If you're not going to call something, don't call it. Don't get caught in the in between. Don't get caught with half penalty or with with like halfway. And I understand this comment on considering conditions. The main event was 15 minutes after sundown, 6 minutes of sunlight. I've talked about that in like on the chat that it is different when it's after dark. First off, visibility in the dark not quite as strong. I was talking
It
to
wasn't. It wasn't all too good at
I
Amarillo
was
either.
I was talking to Peyton Phillips about this, about kind of like being able to see the cones, recognize the cones. Understandable in that sense. The lower pressure, more reason to scrub part, I think that's again like if you knew the rule, if you were like aware of the rule and had seen the penalties getting called, then you have to know like don't do it. Even I've been in races before at a local race where it was 35 degrees, 40 degrees outside in the middle of March, and they didn't give us an extra warm up lap. And I still didn't scrub my tires after the commitment line. Why? Because I didn't want a 3-second penalty. Now, one time, all it took was one race where we all wrecked in the bowl, and they gave us an extra warm up lap the next time around. But
Yeah.
the point being, like, you have to play by the rules. You have to understand that if a rule is there, they're well within their right to call it. And if you're a competitor, you take note of that. Understanding the rules, as Sebastian Vettel has done in the past, is like the perfect example of this in the pit road in China. If there's if there is a rule to be exploited, you find the way to exploit it. That is not on the person getting penalized. It's not on the person that doesn't understand the rule book. But I think there's a practicality argument. I think that TSRS should have probably been a little bit more definitive with it, and plus, like a 3-second time penalty is overkill for scrubbing tires, in my opinion. That's where it lands. It's just a mess. It's not like I prefer not to think of this as like some like massive TSRS incident because I feel like this could have happened at pretty much any series that is high enough stakes. Like when you have a rule that is practically practically questionable, but by definition correct, and you have drivers that are exploiting said rules, and it's a massive part of the weekend, it's going to be a mess, especially with a new protesting system, especially with limited stewarding or like staffing, and most especially at 1 a.m. in the morning when everyone's trying to go to sleep.
Mhm.
It's just going to create a chaos, and unfortunately, that was kind of the storyline of the weekend.
I will
I
say, and I will say, right, like part of the I wouldn't say the issue, but part of the problem was so they don't have like the camera system that everybody does. They have our cameras as a thing, and half of our stuff got lost in customs that week. So that wasn't something that we were able to provide that week either. So I do understand that as well, where we have the view of the front straight, where you're able to catch stuff like that. So I will give them the benefit of the doubt on that side because I know that was something that probably would have been helpful for them post race to kind of look at. But even then, right? Like, yeah, it's we said it earlier, right? There's going to be growing pains. There's going to be hiccups along the way. Second race of the season, new race directors this year, but with time, there's I'm sure again considering the conditions, understood. That being said, Emery, kind of moving forward, right? So this weekend we have Route 66 on what's a pretty big weekend for them with 40, I believe, 206s.
38, I think, was on the entry list.
38. That's basically
Yeah.
40.
It's
I don't know
not
how many. I don't know how many Ks. Hayden Jones has entered. I just saw
30.
Joe Turney's entered for Road America in 2 weeks from now for USPKS.
Yeah, KA is stacked at route this weekend. As the resident KA expert, as people have once said, Caleb Gaffera, Hayden Jones, Brandon Lemke, Eli Warren, Adam Maxwell, Alexander Kardashian. There's more that I know I'm missing on this, but it's a stacked field. It's going to be fun. 206, got Jerry Fandry in the field. That carries a lot. Quinn McPherson as well. A lot of competitive drivers in the outfield. I'm excited to see Road America back. It's been a couple years since we've covered it. USPKS comes there in 2 weeks' time. We got JT running both classes. We'll have Hayden Jones. There's a lot to look forward to. But Route 66 this weekend, MCC Pro-Am this weekend.
Correct.
Just because it's a weekend off from the national season does not mean it's a weekend off on Kart Chaser, because there is a lot of good racing that will happen this weekend.
Yeah, I'll be over at Route announcing all weekend long. I'll see you guys there. Excited to possibly have some cheese curds this week. Some spotted cows maybe now that I'm 21. That'll be cool. I'm actually not going to say, I'm not going to act like I wasn't having them before, but yeah. That being said, we're excited to go back to Wisconsin. Great place, great people. Excited to go back to Road America. T-Pain is having a drift event or something on Friday. I guess that's cool. But yeah, we're back this weekend. We're fourth week in a row for us. A lot of us on the road. But yeah, it's been huge. This summer stretch is just getting started. KC summer. We're excited for it. We're ready for it. Emory, you're not working this week, are you?
Nope. Not this weekend or next weekend. But I'll be there next time at Road America.
There you go. I'll be working this week. So I'll see you guys there. For myself, Emory Lyda, we thank you guys for joining us, for hearing us on what's been, I guess, a little one-on-one. Not really sure who won because we agreed to disagree. Emory will say he did. I'll say I did. Made my points. He made his. But yeah, that's it for KC Grid Talk episode number 55. We thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you after USPKS Road America. You guys have a good night.